Well, let's turn now to the federal NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh. Mr. Singh, always good to see you. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Listen, I was speaking to your party's House leader yesterday, and Mr. Julian essentially said New Democrats want more than just rental units built. The party was looking for more affordable housing, co-op, social housing to be prioritized as well. And here we have now this fall economic statement, $1 billion set aside for those priorities. Were your concerns heard?
Well, they're certainly heard in the sense that up until the fall economic statement, we hadn't heard the Liberals even really mention affordable housing. They're talking about building homes, building housing, but they wouldn't focus on affordability. And we spoke to a lot of people in cities across the country saying, you could build more luxury condos and that's not going to make my life any better. I can't afford that. I'm living in a rental unit right now where a lot of my neighbors have been rent evicted or dem evicted, and I'm worried if I lose this, I'll have nowhere to go because there's nowhere affordable. For those people, they need affordability. And so to see some of those measures being put forward, that's because of our pressure. We forced this government to start introducing measures around cooperative housing, not-for-profit housing, housing that people can actually afford. My major concern remains, though, given how serious things are, the Liberals are not meeting the needs of people, and people still feel very disappointed by the delay of the Prime Minister Trudeau and of the Liberal government. Okay, let's talk about that delay, because I think you're referencing to the fact that when it comes to social housing, we're looking at fiscal 25-26 seems to be what's being laid out here in the statement. Absolutely, and the bulk of the money may not even be available till 26-27. So we're talking the rollout in the future, a year and a half, and even then, the major rollout being maybe even 2 years away. And that would be okay if we weren't dealing with a crisis. But what we're dealing with is some of the biggest challenges people have faced in our country, and the biggest challenge we face as a nation, as far as we know, in terms of affordability. And the Liberals aren't meeting that urgency, aren't meeting the moment. And people are left feeling really, again, disappointed by the Liberals. Okay, but the Liberals do make this argument, Mr. Singh, that their housing investments now will jumpstart enough supply to bring down rental costs, basically leaning in on basic supply and demand. How does that fail to help? Well, one is that it's taken them 8 years to act. If they would have started 8 years ago, we would have been in a much better position now. But they really didn't take this seriously until recently, and so they've missed 8 years of action. On top of that, we've heard from so many people that purely building high rent, high cost places to live won't address the affordability pressures that people are in right now. We know of many people that have decent jobs, but because the cost of rent is so high, if more units are built at that high rent, it will not actually help people. And to think that just by building a number of units, that somehow that'll bring the rent down. Units are built, the rent is set based on what's going to create a profit for the private developer. They're not going to lower that if it's not going to meet their bottom line. That's why we need, in the mix, an addition of affordability, not-for-profit housing, where the goal isn't to make a profit for a shareholder, but the goal is to create housing. Cooperatives, where the tenants together, they actually are the ones setting the prices so they can keep that affordable. Even though Pierre Poilievre would like to call cooperative housing Soviet-style housing and dismiss it, it's where a lot of Canadians were able to actually find something affordable, something that they could count on, something that was allowed them to build a home and build a family, and where they weren't afraid that they were going to get kicked out. Mm-hmm. Now, the government, on another matter, in accordance to the deal that it has with your party, has to bring in a pharmacare deal before the end of this year. But, you know, pharmacare is not mentioned in this fall economic statement at all. Should we be adding billions to the deficit amounts being quoted by the Liberals? No, what we're talking about is putting in place the legal framework. So the legislative framework is not a cost ask. It's saying, let's actually get all the pieces in place so we can move forward on pharmacare. And one of those pieces, as recommended by the government's own commission report, is to have a Canada Pharmacare Act, much like the Canada Health Act, the legal framework. Then in subsequent years, we're talking about laying out what is the list of medication that should be covered, the formulary, and then finally, what is the plan to purchase in bulk. These are all the steps required for us to then roll out pharmacare, but we're not actually asking for the government to spend money. We're asking for the plan and the framework so we can actually move forward on it.
So when you look at the deficit figures, because at this point we are looking at multiple years of deficit, does that concern you at all? I appreciate that you're pushing for more social programs, you're pushing for more social housing, but does that not put more pressure on the government to add to their deficits?
Well, we are concerned about where the government is mismanaging our resources and spending where we shouldn't be spending. We think there could be cuts in things like outsourcing, contracts to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. That's something that we shouldn't be spending money on. The Liberals have spent billions of dollars on subsidies to really profitable oil and gas companies. We don't need to be spending there as well. Those are cuts that we could do. We can be prudent about the way we spend. But we know that investing in building homes that we can afford is actually an inflation fighting measure. It will bring down inflation, since one of the major drivers of inflation right now is the high cost of housing, high cost of mortgage and rent. So building homes that people can afford is an investment that actually would help fight inflation, not create inflation.
Mr. Singh, I appreciate it was a long day. I really appreciate the time tonight. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.